Michael and Andrew, Koi, Tim, Diana, Liana, Ahuva, Michael, and Art. Diana's here. Who else? Davida and Celia. And I think Lipa's coming on. Okay. Wonderful. Good to see everybody and welcome. Good Tavach. Shavua Tov. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nהיה b'dorei.
Amen.
L'chaim, everybody, l'chaim. Wonderful. So, more people coming on. So welcome everybody. Good Vach, Shavua Tov. And welcome. Thank you, and welcome to another week as we gather together to share some words of Torah. So in Canada, if you say the name Justin Trudeau, or in America, if you say Biden or Trump, you get a very strong reaction. For the good, for the bad. Probably not so indifferent, though. Everybody has, I guess, their preferred political leader, or maybe not. Or maybe they have their unpreferred political leader, and maybe it's all of the above, perhaps. Maybe that one might be more well said. But for most people, political leaders touch a chord. And for many, it touches a very strong chord of even devotion. And even though there might be a lot of negative traits in the individual, but for some reason, we're very moved by them. So what is the Torah's outlook on human leadership? How do we view it? So let's take a look. In this week's Parsha, we're commanded. Let's here. Okay, if you don't mind, folks, I'm just going to mute everybody. Nothing personal. Okay. Oh, for those who missed the Rambam, there it is. But we won't do that now. So why is it that people feel so strongly about their preferred political leader figures, or, you know, I don't know, preferred is the right word, sometimes not preferred, whatever the case may be. So what is the Torah's view on human leadership? So in this week's Parsha, let us take a look. The famous lines, and they shall make me, God says, for me, a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst, according to all that I show you, the pattern of the Mishkan and the pattern of its vessels, and so shall you do. That is this week's command. So what do we have inside, of course? We're told about various parts of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, the sanctuary with the holy ark, the tablets, the golden menorah, the showbread table, the two altars, and the house itself. That is a grand structure, portable wooden beams designed to be assembled and disassembled, didn't have a roof, and covered by curtain drapes. This portable home of God was there for, as we know, 40 years in the desert. Each time coming to a place, leaving a place, they would disassemble. Coming to a new place would be assembled, whether for a day, whether for 19 years. And of course, it was done by the Levites who carried it from destination to destination. Now, the Mishkan wasn't the ultimate home for God, sanctuary. Of course, later it would come in the Holy Land, the temple in Yerushalayim in Jerusalem would be the ultimate place where God's name would dwell. The Talmud tells us something very interesting about that future home that would be in the Holy Land. So the Bais, Tanya, which means it is taught in a Braisa, that's what the word Tanya means. In the Tractate of Sanhedrin, it says that it is taught in a Braisa. Rabbi Yossi says 3 mitzvahs were commanded to the Jewish people upon their entrance into Eretz Yisrael, to the Holy Land: to establish a king for themselves, to destroy the offspring of Amalek, the nation of the Amalekis, and to build the temple. So in other words, God told Moshe Rabbeinu, build a Mishkan now, but keep in mind that one day, not into the too distant future, the Jewish people are going to arrive to Eretz Yisrael, Eretz HaKodesh, to the Holy Land. And then when we have our own land, we conduct ourselves, I guess what you call like a real nation, right? As opposed to nomads in the desert. So you're going to have a capital city with a king and a palace and an army. And the Jewish nation will have its capital, not only a place where the kings and the ministers live, and where they hold court, but most importantly, it's going to be where the Bais Hamikdash is going to be, the holy temple, the sanctuary, the home for God. Now, in the Gemara, the sages continue and tell us that these 3 items that we mention here in the Braisa have to go in order. In other words, when we enter into Eretz Yisrael, before we can fulfill this week's Torah portion's command, Vasuli Mikdash, and make for me a sanctuary, there are 2 other things that need to be fulfilled first, beforehand. As we see in the continuation in the Talmud, it says, I do not know which one of the 3 mitzvahs they are obligated to do first. When the verse states, the hand upon the throne of the Lord God will have war with Amalek, so this says that establishing a king comes first, right? Because you need the king to have war against Amalek, the throne. As the verse states, then Solomon sat on the throne, Kisei of the Lord is king. And in fact, that's what happened. I still don't know whether the building of the temple comes first or destroying the offspring of Amalek. Right? Which one comes first? So we know that a king to be appointed, that comes first, right? Because there has to be the hand upon the throne that will wage war against Amalek, as the verse says. But, okay, now that you have a king, but do you build a temple first or do you destroy Amalek first? So when the verse states, and he will give you rest from all of your enemies, then, only after you have rest from all your enemies, which of course includes Amalek, it shall come to pass that the place that the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. You must say that destroying the offspring of Amalek comes first, right? Because you need the rest, and then you will have the place where God chose to have his name to dwell. Indeed, the verse states concerning David, and that's in fact what happened. Just like by Solomon, so now by King David. And it came to pass when the king dwelt in his house, and God had given him rest from all of his enemies. And then it states that the king said to Nathan, to Nathan the Hanavi, the prophet, see now I dwell in a house of cedar, but that the ark of God dwells within the curtains. So the Talmud is asserting that the Jews had to defeat Amalek, establish a king before that, and only then to build a sanctuary, a home for God. Now, this took many generations before the Bais Hamikdash could be built. In fact, it was a project that was never worked upon during the leadership of Yoshua, who took over from Moshe and brought the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael, and actually none of the shoiftim of the judges that came after him. It was only King David that summoned Nasan Hanabi to express a desire to build the Bais Hamikdash, the Holy Temple. Before that, there's no mention of it. As it says in the book of Shmuel, of Samuel, and it came to pass when the king dwelt in his house, and God had given him rest from all of his enemies. And the king said unto Nasan, the prophet, see now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells within the curtains. So King David was now in a position to start building the Bais Hamikdash, because now had a king and Amalek was dealt with. But as we know, the privilege to actually build the Bais Hamikdash was not given to King David, but to his son, the successor, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. As it says, and Nasan said, and now, so shall you say to my servant to David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from a sheepcote, from following the sheep, to be a leader over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you have gone, and have cut off all your enemies from before you, and have made you a great name, like the names of the great ones that are in the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people, for Israel, and I will plant them, and they will dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. And the wicked people shall not continue to afflict them as formerly. And even from the day that I commanded judges to be over my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all of your enemies. And God has told you that God will make for you a house. When your days are finished and you shall lie with your forefathers, then I will raise up your seed that shall proceed from your body after you, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So clearly, yes, he's done the work, but the throne will be carried on with his seed after him. And what do we see? That King David, being the great warrior, and he was occupied with wars to liberate the Jewish people from their enemies, that their boundaries should be stretched all the way from the Euphrates in the northeast to African border on the south. But God wanted that the home for God should be an edifice of peace, and therefore it cannot be defined or built, rather, by King David, who was the warrior, to make sure that there should be peace. And since he's not defined by peace, it will have to go over to his son, Shlomo HaMelech, and he will be the one who will build the Holy Temple. As a result. Now, this project was a huge project. The king, he drafted 30,000 men to help cut cedar wood in Lebanon. Shifts of 10,000 people at a time doing that. 80,000 people hewed stone, and another 70,000 transported the stone to the construction site in Yerushalayim. There were 3,300 supervisors who oversaw all of the workers. This is a monumental project. Craftsmen were brought from Tyre to help perfect everything. Ships would set a sail to find the finest material to the east and to the west. The work took 7 years. And finally, huge edifice that was built, magnificent, home for God was finally there. But the question that we need to understand, why was it necessary to wait to defeat the enemies in order to build this home for God? Why wasn't it sufficient that when you come into the Holy Land right away, we can take care of building a home for God? Now, to have a king, we understand, you need practical governance and you need geopolitical considerations that a king will deal with. But the home for God is a spiritual place of the Jewish people. And it took hundreds of years until we finally got it. The Jewish people left Egypt in 2448. The tabernacle was erected a year later, 2449. The temple was built or started to be built in 2928, which is 440 years later after leaving Egypt. Actually, better yet, no, after they entered the land of Israel. Sorry. 20. From when they left Egypt, it was 480 years. 440 years from when they entered the land of Israel. That's a long time. America is how old now? 200 odd years. So the epitome of and the holiness of the Holy Land is in having a home for God and its ultimate place. From the time they entered Israel, it's 440 years. And it actually only stood for 410 years, the first one, after it was destroyed by the Babylonians. What's going on here? Why was it necessary to wait so long? How do we understand this? Hi. So before we explain the reason why the construction of the permanent temple was contingent on having a monarch, king, and destroying Amalek, let's go into the broader question to understand what is the concept of Jewish monarchy? What does it mean to have a king? I mean, think about it. Now we can ask the question on the flip side. We didn't have a king for over 400 years. We had a system of law. We had the minor Sanhedrin, we had the great Sanhedrin, we had strong leadership for over 400 years without a king. So why was it necessary to introduce this? Now, of course, the Torah tells us, so we have to do it. So there's no question about that, right? Where do we get the command that you have to have a king? When you come to the land the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and live therein, and you say, I will set a king over myself, like all the nations around me. You shall set a king over you. one whom the Lord your God chooses from among your brothers. You shall not set a king over yourself. You shall not appoint a foreigner over yourself, one who is not your brother. So clear commandment in the Torah, right? So we understand, but still, why is this? So the chinuch explains that a king brings stability to a nation. People are prone to selfishness. They're prone to negative traits, to greed. And we need to be protected. And therefore, you need an authority that is over the people in order to bring a protection to the people. As the chinuch says, it's only possible to sustain human civilization when the people select from among themselves a leader whose laws they will keep and whose decrees they will observe. By definition, people are of different minds, and it is impossible for them to all agree to one person's opinion of what ought to be done, leading to chaos and anarchy. Therefore, they must accept upon themselves the opinion of one person, for better or for worse, so that they succeed in creating a civilized society. Sometimes they will find his counsel very worthwhile, and sometimes the opposite. But all this is better than a state of quarrel, which will abrogate everything. So the chinuch's argument is a reasonable one, but we live in an age of democracy, free elections, and people kind of cringe when you speak about a monarchy, and especially an all-powerful monarchy, right? The vast majority of monarchs have been overthrown, and we don't live that way today. And even if there are monarchs, they're just symbols. They're divest of any kind of real power. Why? Because we're afraid they might abuse power. So I would imagine we probably all agree that representative governments with separation of powers, with the political accountability, is helping keep people in check. Now, today you might say not, but in general, probably we would say that. Yet, our holy Torah, that is God's divine wisdom, prescribes a monarchy that the Jewish people need to have. And why is that? Why? So, there are two parts to the answer. The first is, of course, that our view of a monarch is based on what we've observed and what we know of history. So when you tell the people of the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, and when her subjects were lacking bread and her reply was, let them eat cake, you're not so pleased with that kind of response, right? Why could she say that? Well, because she has no political accountability. So for us, perhaps this is, the least awful thing that there is among all of the options that there are in order to maintain a society. It's the best we can come up with. But imagine for a moment, a ruler who was absolutely free of any corruption, capable of truly addressing the needs of the nation. What would that look like? What kind of nation would that look like? Perhaps that would be incredible. Under a true leader, a united nation, not United Nation, United Nations, but a united nation, right? With this true great visionary who only had the best interests of the people in mind. Would that not be wonderful? And this is exactly what the Torah tells us about a Jewish monarch, about a Jewish king. They're not supposed to be in the typical sense. They are mandated with a very unique spiritual task, no different than Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a leader of the Jewish people. And it was to promote the way of Torah mitzvahs, as the Rambam writes in the Laws of Kings. In all matters, the king's deeds shall be for the sake of heaven. His purpose and intent shall be to elevate the true faith and fill the world with justice, destroying the power of the wicked and waging the wars of God. So to be a Jewish monarch is not about privilege. It's not about being over the people, taxing the people, forcing them to do the king's bidding, but it's about a responsibility that they need to nurture the people materially and spiritually, to unite them under one God. For this, we can understand something very interesting. That the first time we had a king, official king, right, was Shaul HaMelech, King Saul. And that was because the people came to Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet, and demanded that they appoint over them a king. As it says, and the elders of Israel gathered and came to Shmuel to Ramah. And they said to him, behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now set up for us a king to judge us like all the nations. And the thing was displeasing in the eyes of Shmuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Shmuel prayed to God. And God said to Shmuel, listen to the voice of the people according to all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from reigning over them. So what does this mean over? Why would this be displeasing? We just read in text number 5 that God commands us that we should establish a king. And we just explained about what it means, a true king. So what does it mean that they're rejecting me? So the Abarbanel explains the following. There are two possible kinds of kings. One, a king who submits to the authority of the Torah and the Mitzvahs, and the other one who assumes absolute authority of his own, making his own laws and doctrines however he desires, like the king of nations of old. The first king, the kind of king, is desirable. Concerning him, the Torah commanded, you shall set a king over you. He is commanded to follow the Torah and the Mitzvahs, as the verse states, and he shall write for himself 2 copies of the Torah, and he shall read it, so that his heart will not be haughty over his brothers, and so that he will not turn away from the commandment either to the right or to the left. But the second king of kings causes great harm with unlimited power. He will not protect true righteousness and justice, and who can tell him what to do? But the Jewish people didn't ask for the first kind of king. They said, let us be like all other nations and let our king judge us. In other words, a king with absolute power to make his laws as he sees fit, like the Gentile kings. Like, we want to be a united people, so let's rally the nation with national pride. Well, how are you going to do that? When you have a leader that will be able to rally and get the people to come together, because the king will be a symbol of strength. We'll be able to get the masses together, and the people will feel a sense of strength and power under this one mighty king. And that's why people come to idolize such an individual, because it gives them a sense of hope. It gives them a sense of identity. Today, that's translated into identity politics as a result, right? Back in the day, it was a national identity. It wasn't identity politics because there was no this side or that side. There wasn't the right aisle or the left aisle. There was only the all-powerful king. But what it did give them is a sense of an identity, a belonging to a nation that they felt was, something to rally behind and all-powerful. In the end, what's that all about? Anybody? What's that all about? No one? Come on. What's that all about? It's about feeling good about yourself. Right? Like in the Olympics. Look how many golds we won, It's about your nation. It's about you, that you identify with this nation under this great leader who's rallied the people together, that you feel good about yourself. That's all it is. That's the kind of leader that we need to reject. The one that is merely there to make me feel good about myself amongst all of the people, and then I feel good about myself and feel better than another nation. The Torah's perspective is not that this is what the king is doing, right? Not rallying the people in such a manner, but he is rallying the people under one God to serve one God. Not to be self-serving, but to be God-serving. That is a distinction. In other words, with a singular lens, this king needs to focus on in order to bring this to the people. And if you know your Tanakh, which I definitely need to know better, personally, I'll say, but anybody knows anything about Tanakh, right? Say from Malachim, the book of Kings. So what does it say? It speaks about when the king came to power, how long he reigned, right? And then what does it say? At that point, that's non-Jewish history, right? Non-Jewish history. Kings came to power, they reigned for so long, right? And that's it. There's something added in Tanakh. Came to power, reigned for so long, died. Was he righteous or not? The Torah tells us. It says in Tanakh. The sum total of this individual wasn't how powerful they were, wasn't how much they conquered, or what they decreed upon the people. Was this person, or was this king righteous or not? Unfortunately, we had many Jewish kings who were not righteous. That's the definition of doing what's right in the eyes of God, like King David did. So this leads us now to the second part of our answer. Okay, so we understand the nation needs a good leader, a righteous one. But why a king? Moshe was a spiritual leader. He was, elevated the people to true faith and was responsible for the justice of the people. He was there fighting against the wickedness of other nations, including Amalek. But he didn't have a palace, he didn't have a throne, Do we need the concept of monarchy? So here we must turn to Hasidic teachings for this answer. In other words, we can have seemingly leadership and great leadership without the concept of a king. But we see the Torah is very insistent about the concept of a king in the terms that we're speaking about, of course, right? Not as the Jews were asking by Samuel the prophet. So when we understand a king merely in terms of governance and in practical leadership, so that's part of the mistaken notion. But when we understand about the lofty spiritual source that the king is rooted in, right, that they have absolute power because they come from the absolute oneness of God. And from there, that's where monarchy flows from. Let's take it from heaven itself. Malchus is the last of the 10 divine attributes. We all know that. Chachma, Bina, Vadas, Chabad, intelligence are the first 3. Then we have 6 emotions, and finally we have Malchus. Sometimes we call it an emotion, sometimes it's separate. Malchus means royalty, kingship. What do we know about Malchus, the attribute, the divine attribute of Malchus? On the one hand, it's the lowest. On the other hand, it is only Malchus that has the power of the Ein Sof to create. Why? Because Malchus is rooted in the infinite of God. And through it, it has the power to create something from nothing. So what does Malchus do? The divine attribute of Malchus, Avatzilus, it goes down into Bria and is the creative force of all the world of Bria. And then Malchus of Bria goes down to Yitzira and the creative force, and so on and so forth, until you have Malchus Vasia comes down into this physical world and is the creative force of everything in this world. So on the one hand, Malchus is the lowest and goes down into the worlds to be the creative force. How come? Because it's rooted in the highest. Ein Sof. So it has the power of Ein Sof to be able to create something from nothing. So that's the way it is in the divine order of things. So that's the way it becomes necessary to be in this world. What it means, a divine king. A divine king is Shichma L'mayla Mikola. He's head and shoulders above all the people. So figuratively speaking, meaning he's spiritually greater than all. Why? Because a king is rooted in Ein Sof, in the true reflection of God. They're head and shoulders above the rest of the nation. They are rooted in God himself. Now, we're all rooted in God, but he reflects it. We don't. Right? We don't. We sometimes do. We do a mitzvah, right? So we're reflecting godliness, right? But they reflect it, period. That's what Malchus is. Now, of course, down here we have the freedom of choice. You can corrupt that. So we had corrupt kings, of course, but that's not the concept of monarchy. That's the corruption of monarchy. So they're greater than all. So they're rooted in the Ein Sof. But how does that reflect itself? Well, what does Malchus do? It goes down to create. What does a king do? He goes down to the people to be there for them, materially and spiritually, to give them their needs, just as Malchus gives the needs and the creative force. The king goes down and gives the needs of the people, spiritually and materially, both. That's the concept of a king. Now with this, we can understand that when you see a king, we make a bracha. Bracha ta Hashem Elokeinu melechei olam, shenasan, that he's given his glory to the flesh and blood. Deeper meaning is that a king is much more than an elected leader and official, much more than just the head of the Sanhedrin, right? But the majestic king is a righteous individual that's a reflection of God. Why? Because he submits totally to God. That's why he's nothing for himself. So one of the metaphors for Malchus is the moon. The moon has no light of its own. It's only a reflection of the sun. Likewise, a king is nothing for himself. He's only a reflection of his source, Ein Sof, God himself. And therefore, because he submits to the ultimate light and majesty of God, he's able to inspire a sense of awe in all people. This is what the Tzemach Tzedek says. The commandment, you shall set a king over you, is about awe. In spiritual terms, a king expresses a unique degree of fear of heaven. His being is his being is subsumed before God, and through the king, this kind of awe and self-abnegation extends to the whole nation. Again, a king is rooted in his source. The Malchus is rooted in his source. The king is rooted in his source. What does that mean? Subsumed. That's a sense of awe. You're in your source. There's self-abnegation. There's no sense of self. So of seeing the king, that's what happens. It's awe-inspiring. Who's the king today? Our Rebbe is a king. Our Rebbe is a king. That's what our Rebbe is. He's a teacher. Our Rebbe is even, in a sense, greater. He has the virtue of a king and of a teacher, a Rav. But let's just stick to the one point of king. Anybody who stands before the Rebbe is completely self-abnegated in the sense of awe. Why? Because he's rooted in his source. He is totally self-abnegated. And how do we see that? Because he's there totally for the people. As we saw with our Rebbe, and as we see even today. Not in physical flesh and blood today, but as we know. And totally there for the people and providing for them, spiritually and materially. That's what a Rebbe does. So we have that concept. As a matter of fact, this even a non-Jewish king, until the Tsar of Russia, who was all-powerful, was assassinated. That was always a metaphor, as Chassidim came from Russia, was always a metaphor to understand God is king. As the what's the word I'm looking for the sense of awe that people had before. It was a metaphor for understanding the concept of God and the awe that we stand before him. The reason we don't need a king anymore like that is because we got the message. So we don't need such kings anymore that are not real kings, right? To be a metaphor. We got the real thing, our Rebbe. That makes it even more clear the necessity of a monarch. Could you imagine the Rebbe leading the Jewish nation and thereby, ipso facto, you know what that means, of course, leading the world? What a beautiful world we would have. And that's going to happen. That's called Mashiach. That's called Mashiach. But it's just, when you get a glimpse of that, hey, I get it. It makes sense. It can happen. That can happen. It will happen. It will happen, no doubt. Okay. So now with this, we're in a better position to understand the necessity of having first a king, then peace in the region by fighting the evils. And the evil is exemplified and is embodied by Amalek, the Amalekis. So remember, we had the question, why do we need this order First a king, then destruction of Amalek, and only then we can have the building of the Bais Hamikdash. And remember, how many years did that take? 440 years from when they entered the land of Israel. We make such a big thing about the Bais Hamikdash, the holy temple. Jerusalem being the holy city. You know that in the Torah, Jerusalem's not mentioned one time in the 5 books of Moses. It's only mentioned as the place that my name shall dwell there. As we will have a better understanding why that is so soon. So there are 3 core interests that a nation must protect and develop. The first thing that a nation must have is internal governance, the ability to maintain a system of law and order, productive lives, that we don't swallow up one another, and being provided for that. There's the negative and, of course, the positive of that, right? And that's what a king is, as we just described, right? Being there for the people for what their needs are. So you need the monarch for that, to provide what is necessary for them to have, right? The second major concern is, after being there for the people, well, then there is those forces around the people that are negative forces that you have to deal with, right? It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient to merely take care of the people, because if there's bad influences around the people, that needs to be negated. So you need to defend yourself against those negative forces, and fight those forces, actually, not just defend yourself, but to fight those forces in a proactive manner, because the Torah tells us to eradicate Amalek. So, if you want to call that foreign policy, call that foreign policy. You have to have your domestic policy, you can have your foreign policy, right? If you want to put it in those terms. And the third major concern is, of course, once you've got that all settled, right? You've got the governance, you've taken care of the people and the needs of the people, and have all the foreign elements that are negative, put it at rest. So now you can have proper peace around you. What's the third concern? As you want to preserve the cultural and religious heritage of a people. You want to preserve that. Oh, that's what Russians are trying to do. That's what the Chinese are trying to do. Right. My sister was teaching some Chinese people, youngsters in China, English as a second language. And the Chinese government is phasing it out because they don't want to have the outside influence of foreigners. They want to keep their control over the people. They want to keep their cultural and heritage, in the name of culture and heritage. Chinese teach Chinese, right? Now, they want to do that here in Quebec too, by the way. It's just that in China, it's a little more overt. Here, it's a little, covert. Can't send your kid to English school if you didn't go to an English school yourself. You got to send to a French school over here, and the like, right? Whatever. That was an unpaid political announcement, so we'll leave it at that. But the new Jewish nation is a little different. What's our heritage? Hey, right now, Torah, that's our heritage. Torah is our heritage. And our culture is Judaism. That's what we're all about. So that's the third component that needs to be embodied, of course, in the Holy Temple, a home for God. That's what we need to build, a home for God. So now we can understand why you can't build the temple until you have a monarch and you destroy Amalek. Because if you want to preserve the holiness of Judaism, before you can preserve it appropriately, that it should have its true effect and its true endurance. First, you need the monarch, take care of the internal governance. Then you need the foreign affairs to take care of, to secure everything. And now you can flourish as a Jewish people with Torah and Mitzvahs. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we didn't keep Torah and Mitzvahs before that. Of course we did. But that we can bring it up to the next level where there is a permanence in the home of God. So those are the three things that come together. And this is what the Rebbe explains. These three mitzvahs, as Rashi says, depend one on another. In other words, although they are three separate mitzvahs, each of them also contributes to the complete picture of the other two. The mitzvah of appointing a king is fully achieved when the mitzvahs of destroying the offspring of Amalek and the building of the permanent temple are complete. Similarly, with regard to the others, the complete picture of the mitzvah is to build the temple is connected with fulfilling the mitzvah of appointing a king and destroying the offspring of Amalek. So the Jewish nation, we cannot separate what this is saying. And this is unique to the Jewish people, is that we cannot separate our political interests from our spiritual interests, our heritage. A nation develops a strong military and becomes a world power and amasses great wealth. That's what every other nation is concerned with. So they only have the first two elements: governance of the people, the foreign affairs, to make sure that they can protect their people and that they wouldn't have troubles from those bad influences around them. And therefore that you can prosper and be a powerful people. Rah, under this leader, right? What's the whole rah for? So I can self-indulge in a sense of national pride that my country has given me all these wonderful things for me. But that's neglecting, of course, to build a home for God. So you have power and wealth you need to have. Absolutely. That's the first thing. Take care of the people. Take care of the nations around you, that there's no negative influences. But then that whole purpose is to have the third component, to have it in peace, to create a home for God, where we can complete the purpose that we were meant for, to serve him and to change the world for good. So therefore, a Jewish monarch is both powerful politically, meaning in administrating rule, but at the same time powerful spiritually to represent God. As we explained earlier, how it comes from the divine attribute of Malchus, of what it embodies. A monarch embodies that, a king embodies that down here. And they can't be separated one from the other. So to be Jewish means that you administrate, you're dealing with the mundane, and at the same time, it's holy, spiritual, and divine. You can't divorce one from the other. And this is why the temple had to wait until Shlomo HaMelech, that the nation was mature enough, that it was sufficiently secure within, materially and spiritually, and from without, materially and spiritually, in order that we could have finally the grandest expression of the Jewish people in creating a home, a beautiful home for God. Did we neglect this until then? No. We actually had it in various fashions. We had it in various ways. We actually have 5 variations of it. We have the Mishkan, 40 years in the desert. We have 14 years when they came into Israel under Joshua in, let's see in a second, Gilgal. And we had 369 years in Shiloh. And then we had it 57 years in Nov and Givon. And then finally, 410 years, the first Bais Hamikdash in Jerusalem. And if you look, as we will see in a moment, the edifice of this evolved. Why did it evolve? Because it represents the home of God as it evolves based on the people as they evolve. Let's look at text number 12. Everybody with me? Following? Chaim. So this is the Rambam. As he says in Mishnah Torah and the laws of Bais Hamikdash, for those who are lucky enough to come every day to learn. I know it's not 1 o'clock, it's not so easy for everybody to come every day to learn. Actually, kudos to come on Sunday just to learn because they have a day off. Shkoyach. But if you can't, you got to come and learn Rambam. So Rambam says, after the Jews entered the land of Israel, they erected a sanctuary. So, okay, before there was Eretz Israel, there was a Mishkan, right? There was a Mishkan. The Mishkan was portable, right? Assembled, disassembled, as we learned earlier. Then the Jews entered the land of Israel. They erected a sanctuary in Gilgal during the 14 years in which they conquered and divided the land. This one wasn't saying, it was not, well, okay, we'll get to it in a moment. From there, they came to Shiloh, built a house of stone, and spread the curtains over the sanctuary over it. So first in Gilgal, it was not portable. So that already is a movement forward from the tabernacle, the Mishkan in the desert. And then from Shiloh, they built a one of stone. So that's even more permanence. But it had a curtains for the roof. Then the sanctuary of Shiloh stood for 369 years. When Eli, the high priest, died, it was destroyed. Afterwards, they came to Nova and built the sanctuary. And when Shmuel died, it was destroyed. And they came to Givon and the sanctuary. And from Givon, those were 57 years. They were, I think, with a roof, if I remember. And then it came to the eternal structure in Jerusalem. The day the sanctuary stood in Nova and Givon for 57 years. So, again, there was an advancement in each building of a home of God, because it was an advancement in the Jewish people in dealing with their surroundings, with the people around them, the enemies around them, and as a result, that all reflects the maturing of a nation. So first we have a mobile structure by Moshe Rabbeinu. And then they come into Israel. Oh, and sorry, before I forget. The mobile home called the Mishkan, the Sanctuary of God, this week's Parsha. When was it commanded and built? After Moshe Rabbeinu is leader of the Jewish people, and he is a sort of a king. He's not an official king, like our Rebbe is not an official king. Moshe Rabbeinu was an official king, but he had the qualities of the king, right? He had the qualities of the king. And so he was leader. He fought Amalek. When did he fight him? 2 weeks ago in Bashalach, right? Already fought him. Now build the home. So we see that by Moshe Rabbeinu in Torah, that's the way it was. And that's the way it continues, right? So the next stage is when they came into Gilgal, 14 years, they were more settled. It was no longer a mobile home of God. It was in one place for 14 years. And what did they deal with then those 14 years? The Canaanites. Yoshua fought for 7 years the Canaanites, and then 7 years they settled the land. Yoshua, in a sense, was also called a king. Right? So this was an upgrade from Moshe Rabbeinu. How so? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was a portable home, and this was a permanent home. After they finished conquering the land and dividing the land, there was yet a greater upgrade after that, a more durable structure in Shiloh that lasted 369 years, made out of stone. So that's already an upgrade from the previous that was not, but it didn't have a roof. Didn't have a closed roof. Had a closed roof, but it was from curtains, like the Mishkan, because it's not the ultimate home of God. It's not the final destination. And yet they still had to go to Nov and Givon, further steps forward, and then finally to the Bais Hamikdash, Shlomo Melech. And this is exactly what the Rebbe explains in the Sikha, this week's Sikha. The sanctuary that Moshe made, having been built in the desert and transported from place to place, was a temporary sanctuary, a tent of meeting. This form of a sanctuary continued after the people entered the land, so long as they lived there in a transient manner, the 14 years that they conquered and divided the land. Next, there came Shiloh, when the Jewish people were more settled in the land, having already conquered it and divided it, and they built a house of stone. No longer was a temporary tent, as it had been until that point, but rather a long-standing one, the Mishkan at Shiloh, 369 years. But still, when Eli died, it was destroyed, and they came to Nov and built a sanctuary there. And when Shmuel died, it was destroyed, and they came to Givon. And the days of Nov and Givon were 57 years. Because the people hadn't achieved true peace, the sanctuary of Nov and Givon was not a full temple. It only happened when they came to Givon, from Givon to the eternal temple, because at that time they had a real king in David and Shlomo. And also they achieved true peace from the war against the Amalekis. Now, many people make a mistake about how you define the Jewish people. Are we a nation? Are we a religion? Are we a race? But that misses the point of what the Jewish people and our mission is all about. God gave the Jewish people the land of Israel, and he gave it in a multifaceted mandate. Take the land, and everybody has land, and make it holy. This is what we must do. And this is unique to the Jewish people and only the Jewish people. No one else can do that because no one else is mandated with it. Make it holy. So whether it is having a king, it's got to be done the Jewish way. Whether it's fighting the wars of God against evil, we got to do it in the Jewish way. Yeah, we got to battle. We have to battle, but we'll do it the Jewish way. We'll do it in the holy way because that's what God says. Not because we're imperialistic, not because we want to rally the people and give them something, to to rally behind. So, let's point a finger at the Jews in the 30s in Nazi Germany. That was a rallying point, right? Today it's against the unvaccinated, We got to blame somebody for all our ills, right? I don't mean that as a joke, by the way. It's unfortunate, but why? Because it's all about a rallying point. Because most people are, as the polls show, in favor of that, of the harshness against. So therefore, you got the people, most people behind you. So what's that all about? It's got nothing to do with holiness. It's got nothing to do with for the good of the people. It's not about bridging heaven and earth, but that's the unique mandate of the Jewish people. So in order to do that, we've got it in full force in all areas, in the mundane that seems to be like any other people. Having a land, being prosperous, fighting off your enemies, protecting your people. It seems like the same, but it's not the same. It's a beautiful story of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Shlomo Dov Ber, who was the father of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who was, of course, the father-in-law of our Rebbe. So he was in a museum, and he was intently looking at a picture, a painting of a battle scene. So I think it was his misharis, his helper, asked him, Rebbe, because he's very intent in looking at it. He says, Rebbe, what do you see there? He says, so he says that I am trying to discern the difference between, it's a battle scene, right? Of folly, shtus, as it's called. We learned in Yud in the Hasidic discourse, right? Foolishness and self-sacrifice. Foolishness and self-sacrifice are worlds apart. The discernment of it, though, can be a hairbreadth. So you can have a land, can have an army, can have governance, and you can have protecting your people. And one leader is doing it at a complete foolishness, meaning, I don't mean foolishness mean doing foolish things necessarily, but doing it for self-interest. That's foolishness. About doing self-aggrandizement. And the other leader is truly there for the people. They're worlds apart, the two. Discernment, to see that, can be a hairbreadth, though, to discern the difference. Let's take a better example. You can have two soldiers fighting. One you call a terrorist, one you call a freedom fighter, right? The world calls Hamas freedom fighters and Israeli soldiers terrorists. How come? I mean, the two are worlds apart. If anything, it should be the other way around, because the discernment is a hairbreadth to be able to discern that. How can you make that discernment? When you're the Rebbe Rashab, or you're a good person, you can make that discernment. But otherwise, if you're intent on seeing what you want to see, you'll see what you want to see. You'll see it, and you'll rationalize it all the way to the bank. Or all the way to the battlefront. But one is complete stupidity and folly. The other one is real sacrifice. So an Israeli soldier is real sacrifice. Palestinian is complete stupidity and folly. A Rebbe is a real leader. Justin Trudeau, Trump, Biden, they're all the same. The effect of one might be better than another, granted, no question. And that's why we say what's good for the Jews, not who's good for the Jews. We don't say, who's good for the Jews? They're not good for the Jews. What's good for the Jews? Because what the effect of them is what we care. Because who they are? Self-interest, individuals. Who aligns better their self-interest with our self-interest? That's what's good for the Jews. That's the Jewish way. That's who we are. So when we have that in mind, what is the basis of all that? What makes the Rebbe Rashab that he can make the discernment? What makes it we can make that discernment? Is because if only you have the monarch, the leader, and then just, why is a leader fighting the enemies? In order so he can remain a leader. Why is there leaders today that they say what they say? For one reason only. Or one major reason, at least. One major reason. So they can remain as a leader. I won't say it's the only reason, but it's the prime thing that motivates them. When they sit around and they're making the decisions in their inner circle, how's this going to be taken by the people? What's the poll saying? It's interesting. It says, the Talmud tells us that before Mashiach comes, that Pnei Dor, Pnei Kelev, that the leaders of the generation will be, the face of the leaders of the generation will be like the face of dogs. They'll be like dogs. Oh, I mean, maybe I said that in everything I just said now, but that was even starker. So one of the explanations it's given is when you take your dog for a walk, right? The dog is, you're the leader. Hey, hopefully you're the leader when you walk your dog, okay? I hope so, if you got a dog. And if not, and then you've got the dog in front of you. What's the dog do? You're not the leader, you're the follower, because you're following the dog, by the way. Right. So at least for what the Talmud is saying, right? The dog is the leader. What's the dog always doing? Looking behind. Where's the master, right? And that's what leaders do today. Looking behind, looking at the polls. What are the people saying? What will be accepted by the people? That will be the pronouncements of our, right? Of our rule of law, or the path that we take. Why? Because that's like fighting Amalek, Got to fight the evils around you. Because why? Why are you fighting the evils around you? Why is a leader of a nation doing that? So that way I could stay in power. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my power. I'm going to become a slave, a servant of another king, another master. I want to be the master. So I got to defeat them, right? And that's what non-Jewish history is all about. Kings rise, defeat, or are defeated. And that's the sum total of it. And that's the sum total of politics today. It's the same thing. It's just not so extreme, but it's really the same idea of how I can maintain power. Now, of course, it's for the good of the people because the polls are showing what the people want. And that's what I'm doing, whether it's good for them or not good for them. Whether I like it or not, I end up liking it. Not because they're bad people, by the way, not because they're really bad people, evil people. That's not, we're not talking about a Hitler here. I mean, that's an evil person. That's evil incarnate. That's Amalek. I'm not talking about that. I'm a decent people, but hey, power corrupts. You have power, you want to maintain the power. So it's just the setup of it is that it can't be different. That's why a Jewish king is number one. A Rebbe you have in your life is number one, because when the Rebbe tells you something, you do it. Why? Because you know he's completely devoted for you and only cares about what's good for you. And therefore you'll do that because you know it's for your benefit and for everybody's benefit. That is a holy people, because they have their eye on not just flourishing as a nation and making sure that others are not there to take over or destroy us in any manner, but we are a holy people, and that's why we have a sanctuary to make a home for God, because that's what we're all about. And when we understand that, and we always incorporate those three elements in our personal lives, of the concept of the king, that I'm king over me. I'm king over me. Not just for a day, for a whole lifetime. I can be the master over myself. That's what we're learning in Tanya every day, right? BIT, Beinoni in training. I can have self-mastery. I can be the master. I can be the king over me. But that's not sufficient. I have to make sure that that which is around me, the negativity, is also transformed. That there's no negativity. And in the negativity, there's two ways. One is to not allow it to influence. You keep it at bay. And another one is to eradicate it. And that's like the tzaddik who eradicates his animal soul and no longer has an animal soul because it's been transformed to a godly one. So the same thing, eradicating Amalek, in order that we can transform the negativity in the world into godliness. And then what we will have is the ultimate home for Hashem, the third Bais Hamikdash. Through that, what we do personally, we will have the third Bais Hamikdash, Bimher v'Yamenu, speedily in our days, because we will do our job that we need to do individually and collectively, and then that will be Mashiach now. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you. L'chaim, 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 l'bracha. Questions, any comments, any thoughts?
Very good, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
No,
Thank you. Thank you, folks.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I love the concept of self-mastery, and I love the Tanya for that. It's beautiful.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. Thank you for sharing, Vilma. All right. Thank you all. As always, a pleasure. Good davach, everybody. God bless you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
take
Be
care.
well. All the best,
Good
everybody.
night, everyone.
Good
Thanks for the
night.
class.
Thank you. Thank you.